Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session. We're happy that you've taken this time to join us today. The title of our session is going to be From Silence to Strength, Healing Generational Trauma Through Translingual Literacy, and Chicana, Identidad. And so, just to kind of give us an overview of what we'll be covering today and how we're going to be spending our time together, we're going to start off by framing our time, our talk, with sharing our abstract, and then we'll go through introductions, and then we're going to engage our audience with this through a cultural energizer, and then we'll open up our roundtable discussion and make time for Q&A, and we'll be closing out with a reflective activity that we hope you'll enjoy. So with regards to our abstract, Chicano Spanish is a language of mixed people with a mixture of culture, values, and experiences born from the borderlands of Mexico and the United States. These unique spaces created a zone of experience with its own caveats of language and variations, ranging from Spanish of Mexico, Castilian Spanish, New Mexico Spanish, Spanglish, Pocho, Spanish to English only, and everything in between. No language is monolithic. Language is shaped and bent through the influence of their surrounding culture. Chicanos have had a complex relationship in the United States with English-only educational policy and the use of corporal punishment to instill shame for speaking Spanish that led many of our ancestors to bury the identity and language deep inside themselves. Taking unspoken vows to not teach future generations their native language and avoid ridicule and punishment, making a choice of survival. In doing so, this not only created a generational rift and passed down generational trauma, producing generations of no sabo kids that were ni de aquí, ni de allá, and faced with marginalization by both Mexican culture and American society for not being enough. So in spring of 2024, a cohort of PhD students enrolled in the University of New Mexico Chicana and Chicano Studies program formed a writing group to support one another in meeting the program's language requirement. This writing group birthed a transformative writing process that reconstituted students' cultural, language, and gender identities and created a safe space for restorative healing. This panel will share the profound experiences of students who completed the Translingual narrative in spring 2024 and those mid-process for a spring 2025 completion. This presentation will address the question of the many positive outcomes that can be gained when gatekeeping process are reimagined and innovated to meet diverse graduate language requirements. And so today on our panel, I myself and Mark Anaya. We have Leanne Llamas, we have Jules Medina, and Jasmine Poblano, and Javier Marufo. And so I'll turn it over to Leanne, who will guide us through our cultural energizer.
Leanne and Jill. Jill's going to help me with this. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a language reclamations spectrum. So we're going to look at our relationship and what we had in our Spanish language, right? And so instead of asking you guys, because it's kind of a small room, instead of asking you guys to move, we're going to ask you just a couple questions.
Okay. So question one is right here.
Uh-huh.
So question one is, do you feel fluent and confident in Spanish? Or do you struggle with Spanish and feel disconnected from it?
And so instead of, again, like I said, instead of placing you guys in separate rooms, if you feel comfortable enough, raise your hands and let us know. I feel fluent and confident in Spanish. Raise your hand. Okay. And then the second question is, I struggle with Spanish and feel disconnected from it. Okay. And now to deepen our conversation a little bit more, if anybody feels open to it. Well, let's see, what are the questions, right? What, let's see, has it, I have them right in front of me. Has your position on this spectrum changed over time? Was there ever a time that you felt not comfortable and then became more comfortable, or vice versa?
So I arrived to the United States at the age of 5. I was born in Mexico, so I grew up with Spanish as a first language in a predominantly Latino community. So Spanish was just, I was using it every single day, and now I'm a high school teacher where 80% of our students identify as Latinx. So, but it's very fluid, right? Because in my family, most of my family's in Mexico, and they come and visit, and I'm reminded of how my Spanish is not anywhere near, right, their level. One of my cousins is a professor at the University of Guanajuato, so that, like, just even different types of vernacular, right? Like, he's talking about what he's doing in the academic space, and I have no idea what he's talking about, maybe because I'm learning about geology. But right, so I think it's very fluid in my everyday to day with my students, my community, my family. I feel confident and fluent in Spanish, but then when I spend time with my family from Mexico, right, then I'm reminded that maybe my Spanish isn't as great as I think it is.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Anybody else want to share on that topic? Mm-hmm.
What factors influence how you feel about your Spanish?
I feel the same way, where I definitely feel connected to Spanish, and I know it. But if somebody who speaks it every day, and like Mexico, like family in Mexico, it definitely makes me feel like, do I know? Like, should I also be responding in Spanish because it's not at the same level of Spanish that they have, and it just makes me feel like subconscious, like, I don't really want to have this conversation because, like, what if I respond wrong and then it just becomes like a laughing stock?
Mm.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That just happened to me 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So I think that's it for I think that was the last of our questions.
Okay, thank you for sharing. So we'll venture into our roundtable discussion. And with that, we're going to have opportunity for our panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit about what year they're in the program and just what it means in terms of like having this opportunity to meet this language requirement through writing, presenting, and defending their translingual narrative. So let's go ahead and get started with that question, and we'll just open it up to our panelists, and whoever wants to start off first, go ahead and pop in, and then we'll have our conversation very organic and whatnot.
So at UNM, we had like a cohort of PhD students, like Mark was saying earlier, that couldn't meet the language requirement of Spanish through the traditional means of either taking like a written exam or like a completely oral exam. So what they kind of thought up was, what if we did this Spanish translingual narrative? So it's where we write portfolios and creative writing for the entire semester. And then we translate it into Spanish all together as a group, and then we get to present it. So there's some cohorts that have already gone through this process. I believe Mark already has, Leanne already has, Jewel, and then me and Javier right now are currently in the process. So for that, I think it's been very healing to have a group where we all know where we're coming from, and we all know that it's okay to not be completely fluent in Spanish. And for me personally, one of the hardest things about being comfortable to learn Spanish is looking the way that I look, and people already assuming like, oh, she's 1000% fluent. And I'm like, you know, so it's been so nice to have a safe space to mess up and just like, you know, come super vulnerable and as I am. And with my translingual narrative, I've been able to confront and really like reckon with the shame that I felt my whole life of not being totally fluent in Spanish, and just being able to go through the moments that you know, keep me up at night, and being able to talk about those things in a way that feels so authentic to my spirit. Like I feel like my spirit is in Spanish, and now I'm able to talk about things that feel so natural to me. in the space of safety.
It was a very cathartic experience because of the shame that some of us experienced not growing up or not knowing Spanish. I actually grew up speaking Spanish and then lost Spanish along the way, kind of like you were saying, right? You just kind of, when you're not around it, for me, when I wasn't around it, then just kind of losing it, right? And then feeling shameful that I don't know the language that is who I am, right? Or that's part of my culture. Because to me, part of, if you lose your language, if you lose the language, you lose the culture, right? And so this was a nice way to kind of revive that Spanish so that we can say, okay, this is part of our identity. This is part of our cultural identity, which I think is really important. And it was nice because it wasn't a test. It was such a creative way for us in a space, like Jasmine was saying, a space where we were vulnerable with each other because we were all on that same plane, right? We were all on that same level. So it created that safe space for all of us.
I'll go next. So my name is Mark and I am a second-year PhD student in the program. And so with regards to my experience, when I was looking at graduate schools and graduate programs, specifically UNM, I became quickly aware that there's a language requirement. And, in speaking to the graduate director at the time for the program, she made me aware of what was ahead and the challenges that it would be for me to complete a PhD program or the degree because I was fluent in Spanish. And so I think for me, it felt like it was another reminder that I wasn't enough, that it was brought into question, like my Identidad, my identity, whether I belonged in the culture, where's my Mexican card in terms of that. And so it just brought up all those feelings of like, here I was, being posed with another barrier, another hurdle to kind of jump through and prove myself. And so that all came up in that, I've taken Spanish classes all since 7th grade, all the way through high school and in college, and I still am working through that. I definitely feel a lot more confident in my Spanish, but I know it's never going to be 100%. And that's just a reality that I've come to terms with and settled with. But with regards to having this opportunity to engage in this translingual writing in order to meet this language requirement, I felt it was very innovative. I felt that as opening up an opportunity for us to be able to contribute to the field, because some of our how do we want to say this? Some of our faculty in the program were very firm in terms of no, you need to prove yourself in a language other than English in order for you to succeed in the program, in order for you to earn that degree. And looking back at that, that's undercutting a lot of voices in the field. There's room for everybody. And so why is it that would be the gold standard of being fluent in Spanish or in a second language in order for you to have that opportunity to earn that PhD, in order for you to have that opportunity to contribute to the field? And so, I really appreciated the opportunity to kind of engage in group writing, engaged in just supporting each other through that process. And we'll get more into it, but it was very healing for myself.
Just to jump off of what you were saying, that whole feeling of not being Mexican enough, or, I think that's something that's kind of often by design in our communities. It's one of those features of American colonialism, You either have to be this or that. And if you're not this, you're not American enough. And if you're not that, then you're not Mexican enough. And I think that's one of the great things that this class helped me unpack. I had always known there was some sort of that going on. There's some sort of that generational trauma that affects the language that I speak. But it was always kind of nebulous. And this class gave me that chance to reflect and kind of really designate what those things are and define them and find a path for working through them, which has been super helpful. I guess that's just the first thing I thought of that. My name's Javi, I don't think I introduced myself. I'm a first-year PhD student, and I come from this little town in southwestern New Mexico called Silver City. Anyone ever been there, heard of it? Nice. Yeah, usually nobody ever goes there, you know. It's a place that was heavily segregated until fairly recent, probably until the 70s. And then even after that, you know, when I grew up in the 90s, there was no Chicano teachers. We didn't learn Spanish in the schools. So language was always something that I was totally self-conscious about. And I kind of had the same thing where, you know, I thought I was decent at Spanish. Then the first time I went to Mexico, I was not. And I also had this weird realization that I understood for the first time that we do live in a really rural place. So most of the people that I learned Spanish from kind of talk like hillbillies, which was a hard thing to take in. But no, this class has just been essential for me for, you know, unpacking a lot of those emotions and starting that real work of working through them.
So I'm Jewel Medina, and I'm in the PhD program. And Dr. Kells, when I was talking to her about the language, she says, well, what parts of Spanish can you work, you know, in the class? And I said, well, I'm a writer. I write poetry, short stories, storyteller, and I sing. And so she allowed me to like sing a song for part of my my class, you know, the final, and then write like a short creative story. So I'm going to read it to you. It's like a short read and stuff. And that's how I process, you know, everything. So she is dry, that's why. What sadness. So young and so useless. So useless if you are a woman of color, a Mexican, and can't bear children. Look at her sister, Marisa. Ever since she had a baby, she was elevated to goddess status in the family. And the baby boy became El Rey, as if she had given birth to Jesus himself. And since Don Juan had only been her first lover, and the doctor had told her she would never bear children, well, que mujer. Now he was a miracle, un milagro. And she practically la Virgencita Maria. No respect of this kind has ever been given to one of our own educated women. When Lauren arrived from Idaho to work with CPS with just a little Zato dog and no babies and no husband and already in her 30s, everyone looked at her as suspect, with guilt in her eyes for just not ever producing nothing other than a master's degree in chingona. No, the fact that she was educated and a professional did not matter, especially to the women. All our value lie between our legs, and the productivity of La Panocha in this capacity only. The night she went to the public square to shop and drink a little and didn't come home till 4 a.m., she left her perito all night in a kettle in her room. Ay que escandalosa y sin vergüenza, off gallivanting around town like a man. After this, we called her whore and shunned her. We called her a bad mom to her perito. How dare she leave him all day to go to work, then one night not even return home to let her perito go? Pipi, pobrecito. Good thing she didn't have babies. After all, useless unmarried women, too happy and wants too much. You should not want so much in life. A room of your own and such is just for white women. Us Latinas need to struggle, die with all this potential and words left unsaid, books left unwritten, and stories left untold.
Thank you for sharing. So I think that sets a good segue into our next question that I'll ask the panelists to address, and that's how did language and identity shape the way you structured your narrative? So maybe I'll go ahead and start off. So with myself, what is it? Having the space to kind of like explore language as well as my own identity. I started off with my first inception and introduction to Spanish, and that was in the Apostolic Church, growing up underneath the pews. my family attended a church that was all in Spanish. And so I remember running through the halls with my cousins, like maybe we were like 4 or 5, and somebody like stopping us and kind of like scolding us in Spanish. And like my cousin, because her mother was from Mexico, was raised speaking Spanish. And so she like, interceded and kind of like, stood up for us and whatnot. And so that was my first memory of like being posed with like not knowing Spanish. And so with my own literacy narrative, I went through, just my journey with Spanish. Taking my years of Spanish classes in high school and college. I talked about, my experience in practicing my Spanish with my mother, who, by the way, her mother, or my grandmother and grandfather didn't teach her Spanish because they were raised in a 2-bedroom house with 7 kids. And so they kept Spanish reserved for their own selves so that they could have their private conversation amongst the children. And so my mother did not learn Spanish until she was 27 and had married my father, who was more fluent in Spanish. And so he would always speak to her in Spanish and whatnot. So she learned as an adult. And because she learned as an adult, she didn't know how to be intentional at teaching her children Spanish. And so I was raised in a household apart from my father. And so I really didn't have that experience of being raised to speak Spanish. I've always known, that, again, like Jasmine said, like I look the way that I look, and there's that assumption by people that I speak Spanish, and so they'll address me in Spanish. And so there's always been that part. But in terms of like writing my own narrative, I really, not until becoming an adult and having an opportunity to fall in love with a Spanish speaker who only spoke Spanish, did I start embracing my cultural Spanish. And so, out of necessity, I spoke my Spanish. And they didn't speak any English, and so we made it work. And so I had my translator, and before I knew it, I was getting quicker in my Spanish. We had our arguments, so that really kind of sped things up. And so the emotions, the drive, really helped. And then, of course, out of necessity, they created that space of not being, or non-judgmental space. And, that I think was really what really opened up my eyes, my ears, my soul to kind of like be more accepting of my Spanish, is that, I just need to get over that fear. And if I'm going to mess up, I'm going to mess up. And so, I think even though the relationship didn't last, it changed me, and it left that part with me that I've carried on. I think another thing that's important to share is that when I was kind of crafting my translingual narrative, I really didn't know if I wanted to be open with my peer group or with even my advisor about sharing that identity with them, and how would they perceive it. Being new in the field is like, do I really want to like come out to them in that aspect? And I felt that in order for me to do justice by my journey in Spanish, it was important for me to share with them my identity and my experience. And because we had worked with each other through a good part of the semester, sharing out our writing and whatnot, it became a safe space, it became a brave space for me to share that identity. And by the time it came to presenting and defending my translingual narrative in a public space on Zoom, I was ready because I had my peers behind me. I had people to support me. I had people that were accepting of me, of my language, of my identities. And so it really, it was a great experience in terms of that. I just felt that it was important to kind of complete that journey.
One thing that I thought about a lot when I was writing, I'm still writing mine, it's just how much things you take for granted as a child. I had this part in mind about how, when I was a kid and I'd be playing and all my tias and my grandma and all them would be just around, and there's this constant just atmosphere of Spanish in the background. And you don't know how important that is until it's gone. You know, all of those people are dead now. So I wrote that, you know, that constant atmosphere of Spanish has been replaced solely by English, and it's such a sad thing. But I think, you know, going more into your question, I'm a historian in my day job. And I always like to say that history gave my life context, because I was able to uncover all of these reasons of, you know, why my community is the way it is. And in turn, you know, why I didn't learn some things or did learn some things. So just, I think that's easily for me, that's one of the ways I structured my paper. It's like looking at the history of all these different things and how it ended up with me, you know, being in this position with my two languages. And that's another one of the really cool things about this class, is that it lets you kind of mold it into what fits your experience and what you want to do.
The way that I structured my literacy narrative was letters to myself and to different things and entities and people in my life. The title for it is Cartas del Alma al Cielo, which is letters of the soul to the sky. And I write a lot about like a lot of different things in my life that have been surrounded by shame and anger and love and, you know, just all of those experiences. And when you're writing through emotion, it is so much easier to connect and be able to use this language. And it's so different. It's so different to be able to express yourself in another language. And at least for me, it feels like I'm becoming a more complete version of myself, because there's always been this longing and yearning for Spanish and connecting more to my family and having that background. The first language I was exposed to was Spanish, but because my mother was in the military and she deployed so often, and we were sent to places like Canada and Alaska and Colorado and North Dakota, like nobody's speaking Spanish in those areas, right? And you know, being by myself with no other Spanish-speaking people, like it was just so isolating. But I would still dream in Spanish, and I still dream in Spanish to this day. So it feels like I'm just coming closer to myself, and it's been a very healing process, but also confronting a lot of that shame, you know. Mm-hmm.
I think feeding off of that, I felt it was like a reckoning of identities. You know, you always have this in the back of your mind of like, you know, as mentioned, like you're not Mexican enough, you don't speak Spanish, you look the way that you do and whatnot, and you know, you carry this shame, and kind of just like putting it on paper and just having that realization and that reckoning of like, what is it, dealing with those issues that you always have floating around in the back of your mind, I think was very helpful, very therapeutic as well.
Yeah, and that acceptance too, like the acceptance that you're not like a complete native Spanish speaker, and you might never get to that point, but that it's okay, like you're just a consequence of colonization.
And so what we do is we decolonize it, right? By embracing our language, by doing these kind of narratives. For me, I think I mentioned I grew up speaking Spanish. My grandma only spoke Spanish, and so my connection to her was the language. But then I only saw her on the summers, and then as I went to school, of course, then education and public education, you couldn't learn Spanish, right? That wasn't something that they wanted you to do. Then I went to college, and I was like, okay, I'm determined to learn Spanish. And then taking those classes, then it became formal Spanish, right? It wasn't just what came out of my mouth naturally when I was speaking to my grandma. It was just, okay, am I conjugating? It was too much in my head. Am I conjugating this verb the right way? Am I saying this the right way? And am I thinking that? So it became so much of I became self-conscious about speaking Spanish, that then it was like, well, this is very different than what just should come out naturally, right? And so, and I'm a social worker, and so I use Spanish with my families. I can speak it to them, I was doing home studies in Spanish, and so I was able to use it in my professional life. So this was really important for me to bring it into my educational life and say, okay, cool, like I can do this, and the identity is, it brings back to me like Gloria Anzaldua's, How to Tame a Wild Tongue. This is Chicano Spanish. Like there's no perfect way to speak Spanish, right? And so we gotta embrace who we are and our language and whatever that is and whatever that looks like.
So when I was growing up, my parents, when they were children, were punished in school for speaking Spanish, and they were even, physically abused in school for speaking Spanish. So in our household, bless you, like it was pushed that, we were going to acculturate into the English language, and as soon as they put us in school, we lost the language, and because they didn't really, emphasize, okay, let's keep the language, let's honor the language. And I think my parents were more like it was out of a protection, of their children, to not have those same experiences of being punished for Spanish like they did. And so we excelled in English, right? Like which is even part of the reason why I even made it to the PhD. But then, like, all of a sudden it was like, oh no, like you don't speak Spanish. So it was going back and like recovering or remembering those pieces. A lot of it for me was remembering. I'll pass the thing.
Definitely bringing up the complexities of the relationship with our identity, our language. Yeah. Anything else?
Did any of y'all ever have that conversation with your parents or grandparents about them not teaching you Spanish?
Yeah, I think for me, it really brought up the conversation of the military-industrial complex for my family, of just her being away and us being relegated to very predominantly white spaces, and just the lack of resources there were when I was left without my mother in those situations. And like it just makes me even more mad at the United States and everything that's been happening. And then also there is the piece of the public education system prior to, or when our abuelos were going through it. My abuelito talked about how he only got an elementary school education, and they were severely beat every time they spoke Spanish. And I mean, I don't know if this is true or not. I like to believe that it's true because to me it's oral histories and it's passed down. But he talked about how one kid in his class was beaten so hard that he died. And that stays with you, and that stays in your DNA. So they see not teaching us Spanish as a blessing, and we are dealing with the consequences now of. Is it a blessing under hegemony? Maybe. But is it a blessing for us and our culture and our spirits? No. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember, I think I even wrote it in my narrative, having that conversation. I remember, like, out of frustration, arguing with my mother, like, why didn't you ever teach me Spanish? Like, I think I just graduated college with my bachelor's, and so I was on the job market looking for my next, my next mile marker, life marker of getting a job, and having these doors closed on me and these opportunities closed because I wasn't bilingual, or I didn't have a second language to bring to the table, or I wasn't proficient in that language, was definitely frustrating for myself. But I think by the time I was born, my mother was 36, my grandparents had already passed, so a lot of the familial, history was lost. So there was that disconnect. And I've only started to decolonize, through my studies in Chicano studies. I was a biology major and a psychology major for my undergrad, and so not until I started my graduate studies here at UNM, did I kind of like have my eyes open of just everything that's gone on in history, and I started connecting those dots of why my grandparents didn't teach my mother Spanish, and how my mother herself and only was reclaiming that language for herself when she met my father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it always strikes me that it's something that I think a lot of us maybe sometimes feel is a disservice, and maybe sometimes we'll be annoyed at our elders for not teaching us, but it always comes from their perspective, from some place of care, you know. Like I know my grandma would always tell me, she would say, you know, you don't know what real suffering is. You don't know how hard we had it growing up. And I guess in, you know, a way I'm blessed that I didn't have to go through the same discrimination that they went through. But at the same time, we've lost a part of ourselves. That give and take is one of those real hard things in this country.
So maybe we'll go ahead and venture into our last question. I think a lot of it's already been expressed, but we'll create opportunity for any of the panelists to kind of share out like what emotions surfaced as you wrote your story.
I think for me, it started off just kind of feeling shamed, right? How come I don't know my language? How come I have to, and probably some anger towards my parents for not teaching me the Spanish, but then as the process, again, I think I said it was like a cathartic. It was a very healing process. As the process kind of went on, it became more of a sense of pride because I knew I could do it. It became a sense of peace because I had lost or a part of me was suppressed, right, or had been suppressed. The language part, right? I am a proud Chicana, but that language piece was the missing piece, right? And so then it was shamed, and I felt ashamed that I couldn't speak, that I couldn't have those conversations with people, right? And so, like again, with work, it was a little bit different. I was able to, I felt more comfortable, I don't know, maybe because of my role. But when it just came to just having conversations with people, it was just kind of like, I was ashamed that I couldn't have those conversations with people just naturally. And so it was a mixed bag of emotions, definitely. But eventually at the end, it was peace. I felt that peace because I got back that part of my life that was missing, and I was proud of that.
I was relieved because I'm part of the inaugural cohort, so I was held back. I was pretty much I was waiting to pass the exams and to go through the class with Dr. Kells, and so that basically pushed me back I think a year. So now I'm part of this class instead of the inaugural cohort, which is the second class coming in.
I think kind of like what Leanne said, it's that duality of shame but also joy because you're going through the reclamation process of acquiring your language again. And I think especially for Latinas, it's embedded in us and it's ingrained, and it's almost like a psychic knowing, you know? It's like going back to that root, that source, raíces. And yeah, it's been super, super healing, and also frustrating because you have to come to the acceptance of your family and history. Like you're accepting colonization within yourself and like reckoning with that. And that's really hard to do.
But from there, you can start moving forward.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been thinking it's like the whole 5 stages of grief.
Yeah.
You know, and one thing that I did, you know, it's been a really cathartic emotional journey, like you said. One thing I wish I had done it sooner,
Mm-hmm.
and I wish I could have talked to all of those viejitos in my life, you know, that I felt all these things for and didn't necessarily tell them. I was super fortunate. One of the people that I wrote about, I told him about it, and he got a real good laugh out of everything. But yeah, that's just one thing I kept feeling is I wish I would have done it sooner. It was such a great experience. It was something that maybe I shut out for a long time, just probably because of that shame. But once you do it, it's really liberating feeling.
I think like my piece of advice for other no sabos out there would be like just to do it. Just put yourself out there. And especially like with our elders, just talk to them, try to talk to them. Like their knowledge is so important, and it's so important that we connect with that other generation. And like, at least for me, one of the biggest grievances I have with trying to speak Spanish with native speakers is based on the way that I look. And I get really angry that they shame me a lot, you know, for not knowing Spanish. It's like every single time I try to speak Spanish with somebody, it's like you have to explain your whole life to them. You have to explain your whole history, and they're like, "What the fuck?" You know, they're like, "What?" And especially being like a little bit more brown, a little, you know, I'm in my winter color right now. I'm from Colorado, so like, but yeah, like that's so hard. And like I see like people outside of the culture, like white people that are learning Spanish, and it's so celebrated. Mm-hmm. Or even lighter skinned Latinos, when they're learning Spanish, it's like, oh my gosh, like, yes, we're so happy. But as soon as you're past like a certain color, it's, why don't you know? Mm-hmm. You know, you should know. You look like this, what the heck? Mm-hmm. So I would say for Spanish speakers that are welcoming in more no sabos or people that are trying to learn Spanish, just like to have more of an acceptance of like the historical context and where people are coming from. Because once you have that free space and knowing that like it's okay and you're safe, the barricade that you have for yourself goes down significantly. Yeah.
I really like how we brought into the conversation about the stages of grief. Because it's actually, I mean, looking back, we are going through that, or at least I'm reflecting on that I went through the stages, you know, the storming and the frustration of like, what is it, being asked to prove myself on paper and write in Spanish and jumping through more hurdles and whatnot, and the frustration that came with that, proving my Mexicanness, that I'm enough. But by the end of the class, like, thankfully we had like the whole semester to kind of work through those emotions and those feelings, and really having that time to sit with it and to acknowledge it and to process it. You know, by the time we were holding our public defense of our literacy narrative, like, you know, I did my literacy narrative at my whole hour, and I created a flyer, sent it out to the department and whatnot. And so like people were attending, nervous, but after like, you know, defending my narrative, there was that relief. There was that reclamation of who I am, the reclamation of my identity, my language, my just who I am. I think if I remember correctly, the title of my narrative is like the reconstitution of Mark. And so that really is like tied it up, bringing it back together and kind of just allow me to stand firmly in who I am, you know, as a queer Chicano that speaks cultural Spanish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to bring back to what Jasmine was saying, it is when you code switch, when someone who speaks Spanish, a language speaker is learning English, I don't feel they get as shamed as we do, like you were saying, like, and they can code switch and you're like, they're excited. People are excited. Oh, you're learning English. When we're learning Spanish, it's a different. You know, even if we code switch, they're just kind of like look at you like, well, don't you know the Spanish word for that? Like you should know the Spanish word for that. So it's an interesting kind of it's kind of contradictory in a sense, because I do try to speak Spanish to some friends that only speak Spanish, and they just kind of look at me like, oh, you should know that word. Well, I don't know that word. But then when they speak English to me, I'm like, oh, good job, like you're doing a great job like learning English. And so it's I don't know, it's kind of a little conflict that happens. So
there's so much there's so much to that. I feel like there's it reminds me of kind of like blood quantum. Mm-hmm. And how, like, if you're not completely this, it's such a binary, and it's so colonial. And I think we all need to accept that no matter which way language is processing, which way it's coming from, Spanish to English, English to Spanish, Portuguese to Spanish, whatever it is, it's fluid and it's alive and it's its own spirit, its own entity. And, we can't think in this binary process anymore. It's hurting all of us when we do that.
Just to jump off that, I have noticed that it's a completely different feeling for me in Mexico. And it seems like people aren't as critical, maybe because there's not all of this history that our little small communities, all the things that they went through. People are so gracious when I go down there and I speak just a little bit of Spanish. Oh, hablas muy suave, So I do think that, I don't know if it exists in Mexico to the same degree that it does here. At least in my experience, I haven't seen it.
So to help with my literacy narrative, I also have a private tutor that I got from Italki, which is great. If you need resources, go to Italki. You can find a teacher from wherever you want for their rate, and usually it's really affordable. So my teacher is from Mexico City, and he talks about that a lot, how Latinos learning Spanish from the U.S. Always have like this shame built around them, and then Mexicans in Mexico tend to be like, what's going on over there in the U.S. that you're feeling all this shame? And he was positing that it's that idea of isolationism and how we're all against hegemony and we build these hierarchies within ourselves to like have more stake in Latinidad. And we could go on forever about that, but yeah, I think there is a caveat though of like your family members in Mexico might be a little bit different. Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and venture into our Q&A portion of our talk. So we'll open it up to any attendees. If there's any questions that you have for the panelists, just go ahead and pop up and ask those.
Mm-hmm. Would you say it's different? Because I'm from California, and obviously I'm guessing most of you are from here.
California.
Arizona.
Yeah, so that's so my question is, would you say it's like very different? Because I live in San Diego, it's like the border town, and I'm a first generation too. So would it be different? Because I also heard that you're like maybe second gen. So it's like, I feel like that's the fight right now between the first gens and like second, third generations, because I know after taking all these Chicano studies classes, I didn't know there was like the language thing until then. And now I'm the one that's like over here getting asked questions because I'm the closest to Mexico that's So it's like, what is, do you say it's different coming from like here, from San Diego, maybe New York or Florida, like with the language barrier between like both first gens, third gens?
In my experience, I think it is, the place that I'm from, the people have lived there for generations, So, and we don't have a lot of immigration from Mexico in this little rural town in southwest New Mexico, So there's not that constant reinforcement of culture and language. So we have our own little pool of culture and language there that has simultaneously remained unchanged, but then it's also dying at the same time, So I think in my experience, it is a lot different. And sometimes, when I was younger, I really would have loved to live in like more of a border community where you constantly have new people coming in and the language remains strong and the culture remains strong. And sometimes I'm like pretty envious of that.
I think for myself, I live in Northern California, so Stockton, an hour south of Sacramento. And so I live in the valley, and so there's a lot of agricultural workers that are present, so there's definitely more opportunity to have those encounters with Spanish speaker only, Spanish, or spaces that are Spanish speaking only. So I think it's more of like interface for me, even though I'm like not at that border, in San Diego or whatnot, I'm still having that opportunity to practice my Spanish, that opportunity to face and kind of reaffirm my identity in the language. Yes.
Hi, my name is Gracie. I'm from the Bay Area. I'm from Avery. And I just wanted to say, Javier, I do really relate with your story and like hearing Spanish be spoken around you, but not really understand the depth of it. Because like in my experience, like I was grateful enough to still have my great grandmother around for a while. Like she passed away like a couple years ago. It was very recent, but I remember like just being filled with like my aunts and my uncles and like my grandma even like all speaking Spanish, but I never really understood it. So like I would just sit there and listen kind of blankly, but not understand it. And I never really bothered to ask. And I even remember like asking my mom, I was like, why did you teach me Spanish? Or asking my grandma, like, why did you teach me Spanish? And they just like, and then like kind of just disregard me. And I wanted to say like that I love that. Like I kind of didn't understand the depth of this panel until I came in here, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like I relate so much to this because I never like I kind of thought that it was more just like a small amount of people that felt the same way. Like I didn't understand how like severe it was and how much more deeper it dove than just like, oh, like, like there's just a couple of you that are like that. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy. Like this whole panel of people who have gone through this exact experience as me, and there's like so many other people that I know. And so I just thought like it was cool, it was amazing.
And I also think that sometimes it's a thing that maybe a lot more people feel, but they don't necessarily share it because they don't want to come off as a no savo, or they don't want to acknowledge that they don't know this thing that's supposed to be integral to their culture, So once again, like this class, it created that safe space for us. And like, I was just telling Jasmine yesterday, like it's so refreshing to be around people who just get it, Yeah, it's been an amazing experience. And like, I wish every university would do something like this.
I think like writing in community really helps like normalize the feelings, because as you mentioned, it feels very isolating. But then if you're in a community and you're holding space and writing together and acknowledging it, you're supporting each other. Any other questions? Yes.
Great panel. Really appreciate it. Shout out to another military kid. The loss of Spanish that comes with that. I'm curious what y'all are. So you talked about like the narratives you're writing, like your 4-year program and stuff. But what are you going to do with all this beyond that? Because it's a really critical thing that's kind of, again, since Anzaldúa, kind of almost like fallen out of the conversation in our field. Raising some of these issues, there's just stuff we kind of like talk about on the edges of conversations, but doesn't necessarily show up in the scholarship in meaningful ways. Do you have any plans of thinking about what you're doing with this?
Yeah, I know for myself, because of my experience in the class and this opportunity, I'm definitely going to extend it into a dissertation. So writing about translingual narratives, testimonials, and so that's my plan. Yeah, just because of how impactful it was.
I'm super fortunate. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
In my job, I work in a museum, and we work a lot with all the schools in the area. So things like oral history, for those testimonials, and culturally inclusive courses is something that the museum's trying to push. So this has been perfect for me,
So I get to move on to comps finally. With Leanne.
I'm sorry, you didn't get to move what?
Move on to comprehensive exams. So I get to go the next level now of the PhD, because this was like kind of holding me in a standstill.
And I think for me personally, I have a granddaughter. I think it's so important to pass down to generation to I'm speaking to her in Spanish. She's learning Spanish. My kids unfortunately didn't, but now because she's speaking Spanish, they're having to learn Spanish. And so, because again, I think I said it earlier, you lose your language, you lose your culture. And so we have to hang on to it. We have to hang on to it. And it has to be a priority, or it is a priority for me and my family. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with it.
So just doing a time check. One thing before we kind of like start wrapping up with our current activity, if you want to continue the conversation, definitely take a picture of this slide. I'm in the process of building a blog. We've recorded our talk today, so we'll be hosting it on that blog with hopefully by the end of the end of the month or so. But stay up to date. This is just a landing page for and holding space virtually so that we can stay connected. That's very much still under construction. But let's go ahead and venture into our closing activity with, did you all get that first one? You need to go back? Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and venture into our closing activity, and it'll probably end up being maybe a homework assignment, just some reflective writing or so, just because of our time constraint. So let's go ahead and do our closing activity.
Okay, so we thought it would be great to write a letter to your younger self, kind of adopting this translingual narrative. So the instructions are to write a short letter to yourself, and like how you've struggled maybe with language and shame and identity, and just reflect on that journey with compassion and love, and see where that takes you. I use this prompt within my own translingual narrative, and a lot of goofy stuff comes up. So these are just some ways that you can share or think about these prompts. And then I also just put up a QR code for a translating app. It's called DeepL. It's an AI translating app. And they are more environmentally conscious than ChatGPT. Some people have strong feelings about using AI, but for me personally, I think it has been so transformative as a tool, especially with language learning. What I do is I write what I want in English, and then I think about how I would translate it in Spanish, and then I translate it, right? And then I go to ChatGPT, but I go to ChatGPT and I tell it like how I think I would translate it, and then it tells me, where I got a conjugation wrong, or like I got the spelling wrong here, and then it gives me like the translation that I originally intended. And that has helped me like literally so much. I cannot talk more about how amazing that has been. But again, yeah, DeepL is just more environmentally conscious and actually for translation. So that can be a resource if you want it.
Awesome. So we'll spend the next few minutes give an opportunity to kind of do that reflective writing. And if you want to share or whatnot, we'll be here as well and share within the group.
Yeah. Or if you have more questions too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the vibe in here, so like.
Yeah.
I just want to say I came in late, but I appreciate you all sharing your story and with this shame and the generational trauma that's integrated into it. I didn't learn Spanish until I was 18, teaching English as a second language. My mom used Spanish as her secret language, and they were really honest in what they were saying. So when I started learning, I would translate. I taught basic English. I would translate the lesson in English and Spanish: apple, manzana, banana, plátano. And then I'll always have my dictionary because I didn't know. And they're like, ha ha ha, que la maestra con su diccionario. And I'm like, wait a minute. You want me to do it all in English like the other two teachers? Or do you want it so we both understand what you're saying? And they're like, okay. So by the end of the semester or the end of the year, they learned English. I learned more Spanish, but then I started building on it. And then my mom heard me speaking Spanish. She says, why don't you speak to me in Spanish? I'm like, you didn't get me used to speaking to you in Spanish, and it feels funny. It's weird. But with my kids and my grandchildren, Spanish first, because they were going to learn English in school. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want them to have to go through the trauma that I had gone through. Because, even in Mexico, it was pocha, because they knew even the Spanish that you did know wasn't the right Spanish. Mm-hmm. So thank you all for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. Follow your blog.
Any other questions? Yes.
it just kind of like, yeah, similar comment. Just resonate a lot with what you all were saying, and I apologize, I also came in late too. Yeah, I was thinking about some of these questions, and yeah, again, similar histories. My parents, they would get the beat down if they spoke Spanish in schools. This was in Texas back in the 50s. And I remember my grandma, who I didn't see very often. I would only see my grandparents like once a year, and then not again for years and years. But I remember walking in and she was watching something on TV, and I was like, "Oh, what are you watching?" And she's like, "Oh, you want to see this is yucky. It's in Spanish. It's yucky. It's bad." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And it's just all these combinations of things. My parents also, it was a secret language, right? Like that's what they would use to talk about us or talk about people. But I also remember just for years trying, and it's like when you mentioned there's this like a block. I'm like, why can't I move past a certain point? I'm a little owl trying to teach me Spanish. It's a little ridiculous. But I remember one of the last times I saw my grandma, and I was trying to communicate with her. She only speaks Spanish, and we had lived mostly in Michigan, Chicago. We never lived near my grandparents. I didn't grow up with them. But she was trying to speak to me, I was trying to speak to her. She can't hear very well, and I'm trying really hard to speak to her in Spanish. And my mom starts laughing at us. And I think too, maybe sometimes, and I don't know if this is a lot of experiences, but I feel like sometimes there's also that block because I could be wrong here, but I feel like maybe there's some parental figures that I don't know if they maybe felt bad that they didn't teach us, but then they almost, I want to say deny or push back against that, but then it becomes a point of humiliation for their children. But I don't know. Yeah.
That's one thing.
Moving, you all talking about.
One thing that I really got out of doing this whole thing is that I should just give myself and my parents, a little bit more grace with this, because they were going through it, same as I was, and I remember I was interviewing this woman, 91 years old, so she's at the end of her life, and we were talking about this exact thing, that those perceived like shortcomings of the elder generation or the younger generation. It was the whole thing of like, well, why don't you talk more Spanish? Well, why don't you teach me? And she said this thing that really stuck with me, and it really informed a lot of what I wrote. 91 years old. She says, "You know what? This is the first time I'm alive, trying my best." And I think I just let that inform my whole attitude towards language nowadays.
It's difficult because it's like, not only do you have to give yourself grace in that moment, but you have to extend grace for everybody else in that moment. For the person that's laughing at you, for the person that can't hear you, for the person that can't understand you, for colonization. Like you're carrying literally everything on your back in that moment, But like I feel like people that are learning new languages, no matter what it is, have so much courage for doing that. I taught night classes for a while of like learning English, and like these people were recent migrants and they didn't have like any English skills. But every night they came after their long ass jobs and and they tried. And honestly, that is where my language reclamation began, because I was like, they're doing it, I need to do it too.
I think with that, we'll probably close our space, and thank you for holding space with us and, resonating with our talk, and we definitely have, fed off of each other and just like all that space and that without, judgment, and yeah, we appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Woo! We did it, guys.
You want to take a picture?
Yes.